Hello and welcome to another evening of frank conversation on hard copy. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. Niger State, north central Nigeria, took up more than its fair share of news space this week as it became the newest hotbed of insecurity in the country. Now, don't get it mixed up. The state is no stranger to some of the rounds of insecurity being witnessed by many states across Nigeria. But this week, it took a worrying dimension. First, travelers on the state's transport service were kidnapped on Sunday, and in a Boko Haram-style video released by the kidnappers, they demanded a sum of 500 million naira. While Nigerians were still coming to terms with the reality of the video and looking at the sophistry of the arms brandished by the kidnappers, another brazen attack on a government secondary school, this time in Kagara, left one student dead and 42 others stolen, including students, teachers, and their relatives living with them on the school premises. Then villages in Shiroro, home to one of Nigeria's famous electricity dams, then came under attack, leaving at least one dead, some injured, and an uncertain number kidnapped. What is Nigeria up against? Do we really understand clearly the face of the monster we're dealing with? How much of a clue do the words of the ex-service chiefs who are being screened for ambassadorial slots provide? These are the matters that agitate our minds in the program tonight, and our guest is retired Group Captain Sadiq Shehu, an adjunct professor at the George C. Marshall Center and an experienced peace, security, and conflict subject matter expert. Group Captain, you're welcome to the program.
Good evening, Maupe, and good evening, viewers.
Well, I'm sure you must have watched with consternation some of the news items we saw coming from Niger State this week. Were you surprised, or was it, something that was long foretold coming to fruition?
Thank you very much. Yes, so many gory incidents that happened in Niger State over the week, but the most telling ones, because of the people concerned, is always when you talk of children, or sometimes school children, especially sometimes when they're even female school children. That takes a lot of attention because as human beings, as parents, as elder brothers, as guardians, when you talk of children, it's always something that provokes emotions. Now, with regards to that seizure of school children, unfortunately, over the years since 2013, 2014, attacks on schools or abduction of school children, sometimes teachers, is becoming a recurrent decimal in Nigeria. We're looking far away from Nigeria. It is one of the aspects of modern conflicts, where since Afghanistan, Pakistan, with the famous Malala Yusuf incident, it is becoming that schools are being targeted, probably because they are soft targets. Most schools in normal circumstances will not have a sophisticated security architecture, and because people are putting their most prized assets. What do I mean by most prized assets? Their children there. So definitely it will provoke. Did we foresee this? I would say, since the famous Chino Achebe said, since hunters started firing without missing, Elioma the bird also started flying without perching. Since it has become normal from Chibok, Dapchi, Kankara, and others, even including Lagos area. I know there was time when there were season school children. So that has become a norm. I think we, at government level, at community level, at school management level, we have not upped our game to realize that schools are indeed choice targets, whether it is for bandits, whether it is for kidnappers, whether it is for terrorists. We have not upped our game. In theory, you could see one or two movements, but they never translated to anything. What do I say? Immediately after the Chibok, we have the Safe School Initiative, foreign driven, because it was started by the former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown. He was the one who, because of the limelight of that event, brought some donors to come and start something. It didn't go well. It didn't, it was not followed to its logical conclusion for the simple reason. Whenever donors bring any idea, they are expected the local counterparts, there are something they are supposed to do, because in any case, even if they start for sustainability, the country has to own it. The Gordon Brown SSI, Safe School Initiative, didn't go up the way. But then, for those of us that have understood this aspect of attacking schools, we were very happy when in 2019, 2015 in fact, there was a world movement for the protection of schools, not only in Nigeria. Like I said, in modern conflicts, we see schools being attacked. So this Global Coalition for the Protection of Education Against Attack, GCPEE, it's you know, a loose coalition of states led by Norway, I think Argentina. They were the promoters of this. They decided they had to do something. Now, the good thing for us here in Nigeria is that Nigeria was among the first 35 countries that actually, you know, owned up to what was called the Safe School Declaration, which is a declaration with many policies which says that government should do everything to protect. Why? Because education is very important.
So we're declaring, but we're not doing much to to follow up with the declaration.
Yes, the declaration came, it was debated at Federal Executive Council, Nigeria did, but we don't have it concretely.
We don't have any real results to show for that declaration.
It's like we're looking at schools as no man's land, as they don't deserve importance. We can just leave them. You see how some schools don't even have doors. Some have perimeter fences.
Indeed,
you can enter some schools through window.
In this particular school, you know, is actually a very, very sorry sight.
Yes, yes.
You know, it's not something that's very pleasing, and it's a government secondary school, sadly. But you know, you mentioned something: the fact that schools are becoming soft targets, and that usually when that happens, they provoke emotions. And it would seem that this time around, the kidnappers knew what they were doing. They're not naive about what they're up against. First and foremost, we saw that the kidnapping that happened on Sunday, where people that were traveling on the state transport service were seized. For the very first time, perhaps in a long time, we saw kidnappers, ordinary kidnappers that we know, release a video ostensibly to the state government to ask for ransom. Normally, what we would normally see is that they would ask the relatives or the people who have been kidnapped to call their relatives, isn't that correct, to get ransom. But this time around, they seem to be targeting, they want state involvement. Assuming that were not enough, they are also asking, you know, they also went to go and take children. So it would seem that more and more, increasingly, the kidnappers are daring the state. Do you get that sense?
I get that sense. Yes, like you rightly pointed out.
Yes.
Kidnappers to release a video. These are tactics we used to know with ISIS, with Boko Haram. But there is one thing. There's always, you know, some sort of collaboration between organized criminals and terrorists. They may not be the same. I will not join the bandwagon and saying the people operating in. For now, I don't have any indices that shows that. But they do exchange tactics. They do exchange idea. You know, using video has been mastered by Boko Haram and ISIS. They know the effect of releasing a video. So I think they sold the idea to, and even Boko Haram, if you remember, their savvy on using media came from ISIS. ISIS taught them how to make, you know, commercial quality kind of video. Before it used to be grainy pictures they release, but now they do just like a very professional filmmaker. They release. So I think they are transferring that, you know, for the issue is when you beam something, you know, you get the effect you want. And there's this element again of daring the government. Like you see in Kankara, they came on the weekend that the president was supposed to be in his hometown, in his home state, they struck. Now they moved to Niger, they did this, you know, attack on travelers before they launched this one. So definitely there is this daring, there is this aspect of giving it wide publicity. This, right now, people are saying, you know, Nigeria has encroached another record with Kankara. It was the single largest seizure of students one time. So these are the kind of indices. It's like they want to outdo themselves. But like I said, we have to, at every level, to be honest, not only government, even school, you know, if as a responsible parent, it has to reach the stage where, especially where we pay exorbitant school fees, most of us, we carry our children to private schools. We don't want them to go to the Kankara. We saw on pictures there. So what do you do? The least you could do is to ask your school authority. If there is, I mean, what anti-kidnap drills do you have? What fire drills do you have? You know, those kind of things. You need to ask. School authorities have to raise their game. So yes,
people that have to start developing that as well.
They have to.
What should be the response of the state to this sort of daring by this, you know, by this armed criminal group? Because what you must also remember is that in that video, and I'm sure it was deliberate, they deliberately showed the kind of weapons they had. So much so that people are asking, what are they doing with, if they're ordinary kidnappers, what are they doing with RPGs? Rocket launchers to kidnap ordinary Nigerians. What sort of bandits or what sort of kidnappers are these?
Actually, these are higher grade kidnappers than the ones that we normally know, that do it just simply. These are more organized. These are more armed. And you ask what states should do. There are three different levels of involvement of the states. The state here, one I say from federal government, which has the capacity to increase the number of security. I will continue to say this. Given at Nigeria's size, close to 940 something thousand square kilometers, looking at our population, looking at the areas that are unoccupied. Because of the large size of Nigeria, we have large stretches of land that nobody goes there. I will not be surprised if there is no, if there are some parts in Nigeria that a human being has never actually touched in those areas. So what does, when you do an analysis of neighboring countries, when you look at countries with similar GDP, with similar population, with similar territorial size, our security architecture is too small, to counter these operations.
Some of the things that you're saying now, we heard that from the ex-service chiefs who were facing the Senate just yesterday for their ambassadorial screening. I think it was General Buratai who talked about terrorists permeating the society and winning communities to their side. He says the solution requires a multi-pronged approach, and military warfare alone is not the solution. And he also talked about ungovernable spaces with no government presence. He says government must provide infrastructure in those communities and win the people. Then former CDS, Gabriel Olonishakin, talked about how he conducted some research some 3 years ago, and he found out that the battle was going to move to the forests, to these areas that have become, impenetrable, or the fact that, nobody has lived there, ungoverned spaces. However, all of this is happening against the backdrop of mutual suspicion and distrust. You saw what happened last week and the weeks before that, the weeks preceding that, the governors of the north, some governors in the north have been visiting their counterparts in the south. They saw carnage in Ibadan over the weekend, back and forth like that. Do we really understand as a people? Are we united in our view of the threat that faces us?
We are not. Unfortunately, the answer is in the negative. We are not. Like you rightly pointed out, Nigeria is facing, threats on multiple fronts. There are the bad guys, whether you call them terrorists, Boko Haram terrorists, or the bandits, or the kidnappers. They are on there. But then again, between us, there is no cohesion. You could see that even among the governors in the Northwest, there is no unanimity on how that problem. So as long as there are fractures, the terrorists, the bad guys, will operate between the fractures. And unfortunately, you raise the issue of lack of trust. Nigeria is a low-trust society. The Obama suspects the Hausa-man. The Hausa-man suspects the Igbo man. And vice versa. You don't even talk of the many, which we tend to forget, the many other lesser non-Wazobia groups. There is suspicion. So low-trust side. So whatever is brought, people try to see behind it. This is between us as citizens. But another bigger, low trust is one between the governed people and the government. Whatever you bring, whatever governments bring, the initial reaction to any citizen is pessimism, is suspicion. Even things that are, logical. You could remember how we started with COVID. There was a time that any governor that has COVID, they say, you see, he wants money. The saddest part is that if you scour the media, whether the normal media or the social media, you see this, conspiracy theories being propagated sometimes by educated people. There are people who wait to hear what Dr. This or Professor This or General This will say. They wait to get their opinions from those people because they have accepted that this guy knows better than me. But we have some irresponsible people who use their high level of reach, this capacity to influence, to twist stories out of their. So honest, the challenge is Nigeria has both external and internal enemies. That is the reality. Because if you propagate, we have fault lines, definitely. The way God made us, religious, ethnic groups, cultural backgrounds, there are fault lines. But some people continue hitting at those joints. They continue hitting at that place where that is only sellotape that is holding, trying to tear away the sellotape. It's not good enough.
Well, you are the peace and conflict expert. We'll be asking you for how we should be approaching this particular problem on our hands when we come back from this break. Please stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Hard Copy, coming to you from our studios in Abuja. Retired Group Captain Sadiq Shehu, an adjunct professor at the George C. Marshall Center and an experienced peace, security and conflict subject matter expert, is our guest tonight. While you are speaking about the suspicion and distrust amongst Nigerians, as I was saying, you are also a peace and security expert. What should we be doing right now when we know that trust is on the down low and it would seem that the potential for conflict is very high?
When the low trust that I'm seeing, especially between the government and the governed, is difficult to place who is at fault. Is it the government that has been used to deceiving people, so much so that the average Nigerian has become so, suspicious that he doesn't want to believe anything from the government? Or is it that the people, due to either political difference, there is this idea of don't trust the government? Whatever it is, what can be done is honest conversation. You started your this thing by the ex-service chiefs, telling us things that are wrong with the security, what they did. I like that. In saner communities, in communities where we borrow all this democracy and everything, learning from their past mistakes and what they are doing over many years, such conversation is very honest. What I mean, these are outgoing chiefs telling us about this. What I expect is honest conversation from the leaders of the security architecture.
Having an honest conversation with the government
government, and the government at both the executive and the legislative level.
Isn't the government that should be calling them?
They call, it's not the calling that is the matter. What is discussed? Do we discuss honestly?
In your assessment, what do you think?
We don't discuss honestly. Because you need to tell, you see we are operating a democracy, by the way, even though I know sometimes the way we do things in Nigeria is clouded by our past of military leaders. Military rulership, when the military is the executive, is the legislature, to some extent is even the judiciary. We should bring our mindset away from that and operate democracy how it is. What do I mean by honest conversation? Each of these branches I call that have to do with security, the leaders of such institutions should be able to tell whether the executive, whether it's the legislative branch, this is what we have, but this is what we need. Between what we have and what we need, to be honest with you, if we do an honest assessment, we'll find that there is a very huge gap between the security architecture we have and the security architecture we need. That honest conversation should be able, I am the head of the police. This is what I have, but this is what I need for the size of the country, for the task you are giving me. It's
going to be a challenge. I mean, when you listen to the former chief of army staff, for instance, when he says, oh, this conflict might take at least 20 years to resolve, isn't that a problem? Isn't that a problem all by itself?
Well, he is talking now as a retired service chief, but I'm telling you, it would have carried weight if you have said that as a service chief.
Could he have said it?
No, this is where our culture comes into it. I have some military service behind me. Check back. It is very difficult to find a service chief or even a police chief or any other chief that is telling, as the National Assembly is saying this, that will say, look, I have such number of vehicles. But from what you are telling me to stop bandits, I need this number of vehicles. And if I don't have this number of vehicles, I cannot guarantee you success. This is what happens in other countries. There is nothing wrong with discussing this on the floor of the National Assembly, either during budget defense or during conference. There's nothing wrong.
The suspicion now, it's not just between the governed and those who govern, those who are governing, so to speak. It's also between those amongst the leadership, amongst the elite, and this is a result of corruption. Do you think that we really can have that sort of honest conversation with people listening when that happens?
If we have the country at heart, we should do it. Because the point I'm making here, Nigerian size, Nigerian population, and the kind of myriad of security problems, we don't have the security architecture as at now. to confront those problems. We have enough policemen? Do we have enough soldiers? Do we have enough other security agencies to do this? That is numbers side. If you talk of numbers, do they have the equipment? Because so many things go into it, so many variables. It's not only numbers. It's also equipment.
But, you know,
do we have the structures? What I mean by structures, who reports to whom? Who reports to what?
Largely, some people also say political leadership is extremely important. You can have all of these equipment. If there is no strategic political leadership, you know, it will collapse. Which do you think weighs more, especially when you look at the response that we have seen so far, especially at the federal and at the subnational level? Take, for instance, some of the responses that we have seen and utterances that we have seen from governors, and also some of the actions that they have we've also witnessed as well in terms of the amnesty being given in some states. What are your thoughts as you ponder that?
Again, like I said, you know, all the solution to this is honest conversation. Honest conversation. You don't expect, it's not the work of the service chiefs to decide Nigeria recruits how many soldiers, or buys how many tanks, or buys how many aircraft. It's not the work of the IG of police to decide on his own how many, because he doesn't have the money. He asks the political masters. But what is their duty is to face the political masters and say, this is the number of X equipment or X number of personnel I want, and if I don't have it, there is no, you know, sugarcoating it, I cannot guarantee you success. You spoke about political will. Of course, the political will, because finally, it's posed at the politicians. We are operating a democracy. There's the concept of democratic control of the armed forces or the security agencies. Yours, the fault where I will blame the security agencies is where you fail to tell the civilian political master where actually you stand. That thing I said, between what we have and what we should have. Let him know the gaps. Then it is up to him. How he finds the money, it's up to him. When he gives you the money, again, it is up to him to ensure that the money, because that's another problem. When you give the money, you follow the money. We are having I don't know whether we have done the screening of the service chiefs. In all you know, ramification, there's nothing wrong with bringing these people. Okay, these service chiefs have gone. They have if I'm building on what these outgoing service chiefs did in this, you should follow up with the new service chiefs. Okay, this is what the former chief of army staff said. This is what the former CDS said. Do you share that opinion?
So we should have a public screening.
Yes, exactly.
Of the new service chief.
Exactly. I support it. That's what entails. Of course, there are aspects of security that are secret, should not be discussed. But things like, okay, like the outgoing so has said that in his own opinion, it will take so number of years to finish this thing. You can ask the incoming this thing. Do you share that opinion? There's nothing wrong. I don't see how that will compromise Nigeria's security. He will tell you whether he shares that view or he doesn't share that view. If he shares that view, so how do you think he gave us this number of years? Do you think there are ways we can cut that number? Because nobody wants to be fighting ever for the next 20 years. Development will be arrested, everything will be arrested, will be pouring money. So you hear from him. How does that, even if Shehu is listening to that one, how does that help him? It doesn't. Because sometimes we overemphasize that is security, and I think this is what our legislators don't understand. They say everything has to be, you know, behind. The people have a stake. After all the uproar, change the services, I rightly believe that the average Nigerian wants to know what is the new thing that these service chiefs are giving. And the questions that there are motives of asking these questions is not, you are not asking him how many guns do you have in Sambisa, for example, because that is operational secret. But how are we, from what the service chiefs did, how are you going to improve it? Whether we like it or not, there is this perception, which has even been mentioned by the minister when he was being listened, that there's no cooperation between the different services. You ask the service chiefs, okay, this is the perception that people are having. How are you people in concrete terms going to improve that cooperation? I don't see how that conflicts with Nigeria's security. The Nigerians who were clamoring to change the service chiefs, they also want to know what's tough. But what do our legislators do? They go and say, security, you cannot discuss it in fact, by that discussion, it's not, they say security is too important. It's one gender to be left in the hands of generals. As you are doing that, these people are giving people, there are public-spirited individuals who will be listening. If they hear anything, they can make their way either to the presidency or the legislature and give solutions. There could be solution elsewhere. But everything, up to now, I'm not sure. Somebody said that the House of Reps have
done the screening.
The screening.
Yes.
It's so silent. It's not the kind of screening I want. It's not the kind of screening I want. Because the Nigerians also ought to know what are these people doing. This is what is done there.
Well, hopefully, you know, we will be following how the screening goes at the Senate, and maybe they will take your suggestion on board and make sure it's an open screening, as we usually see for, you know, some other positions that are not
exactly
are not about security chiefs. Well, we have to thank you so much for coming on the program. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on Hard Copy. Well, that's the program tonight. However, we want to hear from you. Talk to us using the handles on your screen. Thank you for watching. I'm Malkwell Yusuf. Good night.